Well, there's a lot of things about guys like John because supposedly he came from nothing. He was, and
Joe, he
yes,
came from nothing.
yep,
His family, they lived poorer than poor.
hmm
They didn't even have blankets. They used to have burlap potato sack bags
wow,
with a leaky roof. And him and Pete used to sleep on the side with Jeannie because the roof used to leak.
wow.
Poorer than poor.
I think that's the way he was like that because I think because I know couple of guys like that too, but they came from nothing too, and they were very generous as they had gotten things in their lifetime. You know what I mean? I've done the same thing myself, so I
But
know.
you see, but Joe, by all rights,
Yeah.
you take Jackie knows a good guy, but
Yep.
he was weak. He couldn't he couldn't protect John. And I
Okay.
don't mean physically. I'm
Yeah.
saying
Yeah. I
he
get you.
couldn't protect John the way a proper skipper should have.
Hmm.
So it was me and John and Tommy Gambino, and they became very close, John and Tommy,
Wow.
because of the garment center.
Right.
And there's a story I'll get into about
Okay.
what would have been if the arrest didn't come down the way it did. But I don't want to get into that now because we're not
Okay.
there.
That's fine. Yeah. Yeah.
And Tommy Gambino, they grew to love each other. And we got to remember, Paul Castellano never treated Tommy good. John's the one that treated Tommy like a man and gave Tommy the respect.
Well, something from what I understand, Paul didn't treat anybody good,
It was all
from what I
about money
understand.
for Paul
Yep.
Castellano. Okay?
Yep.
He treated, listen, Tommy's father was the boss for 20, 25 years. He
Yeah. Long
deserved
time.
that respect.
Right.
Okay? Paul didn't treat Tommy right.
Hmm.
Paul was all about the money. He didn't treat captains right. You
That's
know,
what I heard. Yeah. That's I heard that too.
if you made a score and it was 100 grand, you gave Paul 80 grand. And
Wow. Wow.
John wasn't
Yeah.
like that. John
Yeah.
John was not like that.
No.
Everybody lived with John. And yeah, am I partial to John? Yeah, but I was there.
Hmm.
Everybody lived. John
Hmm.
Gotti was not greedy. He was giving it away to a fault. To a
Right.
fault.
They said he used to like to gamble.
The one issue we had was his
Right.
gambling.
Right.
Horses, dogs, cats, basketball games.
They s
Uh,
Yeah, they said he'd bet on anything, he didn't
he would
care.
bet on
Yeah.
anything. And he had a good friend, this guy Carlo Lizza, who owned Lizza Industries. They used to pave all the roads on Long Island, New York City. You might have
Mhm.
heard of Lizza Industries.
I've heard
And
of it.
and Carlo, uh,
I think I heard of it,
wa-
yeah.
very rich man, multimillionaire, and he had a brother, Ali
Okay.
Lizza, and Ali and John were very close. And Ali was another guy that was allowed to go to the house.
Wow.
It was yeah, just but Ali's entree was Ali had horses, and John loved the horses. So Ali would go to the house and, oh, boss, this is going to win, and that's going to win, and that's going to win, and this is going to win. And obviously, those horses are still running.
Yeah.
And finally, I said to Ali, do me a favor. Why don't you stop and get bagels instead of going to the house? Every time you go to the house, you cost me 100,000 or 200,000.
Yeah.
But that was John's thing. So, again, we used to tone it down. If he said, I want to bet 10,000 here, so the 10,000 became 2,000. And when they would win, of course, he would go crazy. You would say, what'd you do? John, you won one race in 2 weeks.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm still saving you money.
Yeah. That was
So
good. Yeah, that was I used to go to the Cross Bay Diner. Right across the street up the block was the bagel place. It was out of this world.
Louis Dodone owned that
That
bagel place for the
that
Lucchese's.
Okay, that's the place.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's the
I didn't
place.
know he owned the place.
Yeah,
Okay.
and by the way, Louis was probably one of the only good Lucchese's that I could talk about.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
Louis
yeah, yeah.
Dodone. He was a good Lucchese, unlike the others.
They like I said, I wanted to get a little bit because I didn't like a lot of people. It's nice that it's easy to talk about somebody after they die, obviously, and that kind of thing. And
Listen,
I don't really respect that either. Um, you know,
you'll hear 100 guys could talk about you or talk about me.
right?
Nobody knew me. The only thing with me, they were jealous.
Yeah. Well, because
They
you were
were
close to,
jealous. They
yeah.
couldn't say nothing about me. I didn't. If I ever interact, the only people I would interact with was for business. Not for, I was not involved in organized crime,
Hmm.
as you
Did
call it, organized crime.
Did
But
you
if
know?
there was a business deal, Joe, I made sure
Yeah.
that John Gotti got his end.
So that was pretty much your function in with John, that you took care of the businesses, certain businesses and stuff to help him out and
Certain
stuff like that.
businesses, and I would learn about certain skippers doing whatever.
Okay.
And you got to remember, the Gambino family is a huge operation,
Oh, sure.
and you got unions, you got associations, you got trucking, you got this, you got construction, everything you could think of. There was
Right.
no, and you got to remember that was Paul was partners with Frank Perdue. Okay,
Yeah, I heard that when I was in the joint. Yeah,
I
I
mean,
heard that in the joint.
we weren't partners with Frank Perdue.
Right.
Paul owned Purdue. He owned Bobby Rubino's Ribs. You name it,
Wow.
this guy owned it. And if he didn't own it,
Wow.
you were getting extorted.
Yeah, he was
John
tough.
didn't
Yeah.
operate. John didn't operate that way. Legitimate business. He wasn't. He'd be the first to admit, I'm not a legitimate business guy, and
Right.
that's where me and a few other guys would come in, and we would do what we had to do. But
Well, I don't. I'm sorry,
go ahead,
Lewis. I don't think
no,
it
go
was a
ahead.
mistake. I don't think it was a mistake that they got rid of Paul. To be honest with you, I really don't. And from the word I heard in the street was like, good riddance. Like, forget about him. You know what I mean?
You're 100% right. You're
Yeah.
100% right. And you know what? Let me tell you about John.
Yeah.
His son Phil
Go ahead.
Castellano. Okay, John
Mhm.
didn't take nothing off them. He
Wow.
left them with the concrete company. He left them with Purdue Chicken. And
Really?
in fact, that's right. You know a
Wow.
boss. Let's say it's true that John whacked Paul. I don't know
Yeah.
if it's true or not, but let's say it is true.
Okay.
Do you know a boss that wouldn't take anything off their family?
It's no. They usually take everything. Yeah.
That's right. Now
That's right.
you're in the life on a as a wise guy.
Hmm.
Okay, I was in the life as with a boss in a different on a
Right.
different level.
Right.
There is He assigned Tommy Gambino to service the Castellano family.
Wow.
Okay, he didn't assign him some prick. He didn't assign him some bad captain. He said to Tommy, "Take care of the Castellano family." Took
Wow.
He took nothing off them. I'm not saying that they didn't have to kick up
Oh
because,
yeah, but that's okay. But
but
that's normal though.
that's right.
Yeah,
But
that's normal.
same with Joe Gallo's son,
Right.
Joe Gallo Jr., who I hated him and he hated me. He was in a garment center.
I didn't
And
know
I
him. Yeah.
Yeah, and I told Joe Gallo, I said, your ride's over. You're done up here. Whatever you're getting, the boss is letting you have.
So they're doing you a favor. They're helping you
They're
out.
doing
Yeah.
you a
Just
favor. So
yeah.
me and Gallo didn't get along because I was always watching him,
Hmm.
and he knew I was watching him. So
Right.
and I told but
You didn't
remember
like.
Tommy was assigned. Tommy was very close to Joe and Gallo.
Hmm. Oh, I
So
didn't know that.
oh yeah, they were BFFs.
Okay.
And now me and John had an issue over this. Why would you assign Tommy Gambino to take care of Joe Gallo's kid? There's a partiality there.
Hmm.
But Tommy and I says to Tommy, either we do this nice or, and me and Tommy were close, and Tommy did it nice. Listen,
Wow.
he favored Joe Gallo. Listen, did he love me, Tommy Gambino? No, but he had no fucking choice.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
What was
But
his
they said.
choice?
Yeah. Exactly. But wait, they said Tommy was not a bad guy in real life, though.
Well, he wasn't a bad guy, but
Right.
John let him live. John let him
Yeah.
thrive.
Yeah.
John
Yeah.
didn't take. John said one thing: you whatever Lewis wants, you give Lewis, and don't make him ask you twice, Tommy. I don't want to hear him say any beefs about you.
Hmm.
And we got along. I was young.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I knew then what I knew now, I don't think Tommy and I would have been good friends.
Right. Yeah.
But
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
way it was.
You live and learn. Exactly. So
John had an expression, Joe. Don't reach into anybody's pocket. There's enough for everybody. You know a boss that thinks that way? In any
no.
family, you know a boss that thinks that way. He used to tell me, Lewis, don't reach into anybody. There's enough here. Whatever you want, go take. But let
Well,
everybody live.
the
Tell
only
me if
one
you know a boss like that.
the only one story, Lewis, and you're right though, because I don't know many. There's only one guy that I remember. My father. I told the story a couple of times. Uh, is when my father made a score. He brought it to the boss, who was Barney, because he's in the Genovese family. And Barney had said to him, "You did this on your own?" And my father said, "Yes." He said, "Then that's all yours." He didn't take a dime. Now, I believe that's a true story because that went around
That's a
the.
John Gotti. That's a
Yes,
John Gotti.
yes. So I have to say
John
that.
Gotti Senior, not Junior. Junior would take the gold out of your teeth, but Senior,
Now I didn't know. I only met John Jr. in MDC. I seen him once in. I don't know if you remember Channel 80 back in Long Island in the days.
of course, Philly Basile
Okay.
and I were the closest friends. You know, Philly was around Paul Vario, and
Yeah. Okay.
John was always friendly with Paul Vario.
Ah.
See, and when Philly was sick, Philly died of cancer. Phil made me his executor,
Okay.
and I had to clean up. Phil Basile died broke, believe it or not.
Really?
Rich in property,
Right.
no cash. When
Wow.
Paul Vario was out of the picture, the
Mhm.
Lucchese family extorted and abused Phil Basile like you never saw before.
I never knew this. I never
Joe
knew that.
Caridi, Joe C, Johnny Sideburns, Danny Cateo, all
Mhm.
those guys. But you see, John was still the boss then, even though he was locked up.
Okay.
And there was nothing they could do because Philly Basile owed me 7 figures.
Wow.
So they weren't stepping on John Gotti at this point. And
Mhm.
thank God, I was able to liquidate, take care of Philly's family, give them what they had to get, and get my money back.
Wow.
Because those Lucchese's, they wrecked Philly Basile, wrecked them.
Yeah.
And remember, Philly Basile was his relationship with Paul Vario, they were best friends.
I didn't know
That
that
was,
either.
oh, they were like that was a father-son relationship. And remember, he gave Henry Hill the job at the request of Paul Vario.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Oh yeah.
Oh, so
Oh,
so you go, yeah, because you're going way back. I mean,
I'm
I
going
didn't know
back
none
into
of
the
this.
70s, early 80s.
Yeah.
You got to understand, Philly wasn't a light guy because
Mhm.
he wasn't that kind of guy. If he saw you at the bar, he would say, "Hey, Joe, you want a drink?" He wasn't like that. He didn't, not only with you, but even with the Lucchese's.
Wow.
See, Philly made a lot of money and he forgot where he came from. He forgot you can't operate the way he was operating without Paul Vario.
Yeah, that happens a lot to these guys though too. They forget, and then
They
yeah,
forget.
and that's why
And I used to
I have
tell
respect
Phil,
for John that did that because, like you said, he came from nothing and he still gave away. You see, I
right?
like that.
Phil wasn't a generous guy. He wouldn't buy you a drink. And I used to say, Phil, what's it cost you to buy somebody? And back then, Absolute was big. What's it cost you to buy Absolute? What's it cost you to buy a Chivas Regal?
Yeah, right.
And Philly wasn't like that. Because he had Vario there, and everything was great until he didn't have
Mhm.
Vario anymore. Then those Lucchese's, they raped him,
Wow.
abused him. Used to go to the club and slap his managers.
Holy shit.
See, and when that happens, you have no more respect.
That's right. That's exactly right.
But I stopped a lot of it. When I say I mean John.
Yeah,
And
I know.
and John didn't have no love for Phil, but John stepped up because he had to step up because of me.
Wow.
Yeah. So